conservative website in the US has leaked recordings of morning briefings from the news network CNN. Now, the tapes feature company president Jeff Zucker and Project Veritas claims they prove the network's bias against President Trump.
Okay, I just want to reemphasize that, I think we cannot normalize what has happened here in the last week with Trump and his behavior. And I go back to what David Chalian said, that this is a president who knows he's losing, who knows he's in trouble, is sick, maybe is on the after effects of steroids or not, I don't know, but he is acting erratically and desperately, and we need to not normalize that.
Well, the network has responded to the leak, threatening legal action against Project Veritas. And it's defended the language used in the recording, saying diversity of personal opinion is what makes CNN strong. We welcome and embrace it. Well, let's get now some inside scoop from Neil McCabe, communications manager for Project Veritas, and who, if I'm not mistaken, was actually involved in producing these releases. Welcome to the program. First off, I want to ask you, the published recordings would seem to show that CNN is not Trump's greatest fan, which probably for some doesn't come as a huge surprise. So what's new here?
Well, I think what's new here is that you hear the outgoing president of CNN, Jeff Zucker, dictating to his hosts, reporters, editors, and producers what the news will be, not based on whether it is true, not based on whether it's important, but whether or not it fits Jeff Zucker's worldview and personal political agenda. Now, you just read a statement from CNN saying that they welcome a diversity of opinion. I've been on these calls. There's no diversity of opinion. Nobody objects. Nobody challenges. When Cynthia Hudson says that Cuban Americans are supporting Donald Trump because they are attracted to bullies, nobody says, hey, Cynthia, that's a little outrageous. Why don't you dial that back? I mean, I don't think that's what they're welcoming as diversity of opinion. Basically, everybody agrees with everything that Zucker says, and his executives and everybody else on the call. The one time he was challenged during this exercise is when James O'Keefe called Jeff Zucker on Wednesday and asked him, how can you still consider yourself the most trusted name in news?
You're unmuted.
Hey, Jeff Zucker, are you there? Hey,
Yes.
This is James O'Keefe. We've been listening to your CNN calls for basically 2 months, recording everything. Just wanted to ask you some questions if you have a minute. Do you still feel you're the most trusted name in news? Because I have to say, from what I've been hearing on these phone calls, I don't know about that. I mean, we got a lot of recordings that indicate you're not really that independent of a journalist.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. So everybody, in light of that, I think what we'll do is we'll set up a new system, and we'll be back with you. We'll do the rest of the call a little bit later.
We're going to release those recordings today at 7 o'clock, so stay tuned. It's going to be fun.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.
So you just heard me talk to the president of CNN, Jeff Zucker, and inform him that that we are going to release a number of recordings today. I unmuted myself into the conference line, and they're still on there. They're listening to me right now.
That one challenge, the response came from CNN, we're going to call the police. It's outrageous.
Now, some have questioned whether it was ethical or appropriate to leak these calls. What's your response to that? And I want to ask you, what if the tables were turned and your private discussions with editors were exposed? Would you support it as well then?
Who is objecting? CNN? I mean, they ran secretly recorded tapes of First Lady Melania Trump just weeks ago. They ran the Access Hollywood tapes. They ran tapes secretly recorded of Mitt Romney when he was the 2012 Republican candidate for president. The idea that CNN is suddenly upset about somebody secretly recording a meeting or a conference call and putting it out to the public. That's absolutely absurd. And of course, I have to go back to the whole idea that we're journalists at Project Veritas. We practice undercover journalism, and we work with insiders, and we are journalists. And CNN is they claim to be journalists themselves. Their response is what? To call the police? They said they reported us to law enforcement. It's an absolute joke.
Well, actually picking up on that, CNN did react very quickly on Twitter, no less, said that it's going to get law enforcement involved. My question is, are you ready? And do you think that the law is on your side here?
I don't believe for a minute that the police are to come knocking on our door. Everything that Project Veritas does is legal. We have a very well-trained and very well-paid legal staff, and I'm highly confident that everything we did was within the legal guardrails.
Every time you've been sued, has anyone done so successfully?
No, Sean, we've won every single lawsuit at Project Veritas, and I know they said, quote, this is CNN Communications, legal experts say this may be a felony. We have legal experts at Project Veritas, and we think Jeff Zucker is just very mad and embarrassed here for what we have exposed.
And certainly, we have a license given to us by the Bill of Rights called the First Amendment, and the Supreme Court has been very generous when someone's right to express the First Amendment has been questioned, especially among journalists. So no one has called us from law enforcement. That's just something they said. That tweet came from CNN's PR staff, and I think you can call that a PR stunt.
Looking at the wider picture here, obviously, particularly with Trump at the helm, the word fake news has come up a lot. Discussions of bias in media have become really commonplace. I want to ask you, do you think that that's an inevitability that we have to accept now, or do we need to fight against it actively?
Well, you know, the marketplace of ideas is where this stuff is supposed to be sorted out. You know, CNN has a bias, and that bias is revealed on the tapes. It's not necessarily Republican or Democrat, conservative or Republican. It's, do you agree with Jeff Zucker or not? If you don't agree with Jeff Zucker and his worldview and his agenda, you are crazy. And he tells them, we will not normalize you. He talks about going after Senator Lindsey Graham. Why? Because Senator Lindsey Graham does not hew to his narrative. And everybody on the call says, yes, Jeff, fantastic, Jeff. We're with you, Jeff. Nobody challenges him. Nobody objects. Nobody says, hey, I'm on the ground here and state whatever and saying, Jeff, that story isn't right. You never hear people correct Jeff Zucker. He is dictating the news. And when he leaves, we'll see what happens to CNN. Maybe they'll change.
And finally, I just want to ask you, I know you want to keep people in anticipation, but can you tell us, can we expect more tapes, and how far are you going or willing to go to expose what some see as a rigged system?
Well, let me say this. This is the Advent season. And so Project Veritas and our founder, James O'Keefe, have decided to give the people an Advent calendar of CNN releases. So there will be 3 more releases tonight. And then from here through Christmas, we will be releasing 1 or 2 tapes every day, which will be the CNN raw tapes, not the edited down for the those salient clips, but the entire meetings will be posted online and people can see for themselves or hear for themselves. And frankly, we're accused of all sorts of editing tricks. They're going to wish that we had edited their meetings because people will hear them in the raw, and that's hashtag CNN raw.
Well, we'll be waiting to hear on that. Thank you so much for coming on to the programme and speaking to us. That was Neil McCabe, Communications Manager for Project Veritas. Good luck.
Going through all these, like, hundreds of hours of Jeff Zucker's phone calls at CNN here.
Good morning, everybody.
Just so much tape. So much tape.
Morning. Okay, obviously, we have an incredible story on our hands.
We sure do, and we're going through all this tape, and we're putting it in the timeline. We're listening to Zucker talking to his staff, assigning projects, talking about politics.
lot to go through. What's the hashtag, Eric?
CNN Tapes.
CNN Tapes. Hashtag CNN Tapes, and the website is?
ExposeCNN.com.
CNN says on Jeff Zucker's 9 a.m. editorial conference call how they, the Democratic Party, powerful interest groups, may determine how CNN will cover Trump not conceding the presidential election.
I just want to underscore something that Michael said earlier about the transition and Trump, because I've been talking to a lot of people this morning on both sides, and I just keep hearing the same thing, both from Republicans who have not come out to congratulate Biden, but also to those who have in the Democrats, and that is that we have to be, news organizations have to be very careful and very responsible about not giving Trump too much of a platform on his not conceding, because they feel the transition can go forward. And, other than the national security briefings, which are critical to start now, they just don't want us to exaggerate that Trump isn't leaving office. And I'm going to have a lot of specific reporting on that later today, but just big picture wanted to underscore what Michael had said.
Yep, agreed.
On the issue of why it's important to get the transition going right, the 9/11 report talks about one of the problems was that the trouble that was brewing got lost during the transition. So if you want a good concrete example of what happens when you don't have a good transition, go look at the Twin Towers.
Yeah. So I think that's an important point. I think it was discussed a little bit yesterday in terms of national security. I think it's really important to raise again. I would encourage folks to think about, that 9/11 Commission report and the lack of transition.
Jeff Zucker, president of CNN, explains to his editorial team on the 9 a.m. call that we recorded that they should, quote, lean in to not normalizing Trump's erratic behavior. Listen to this.
Okay, I just want to reemphasize that, I think we cannot normalize what has happened here in the last week with Trump and his behavior. And I go back to what David Chalian said, that this is a president who knows he's losing, who knows he's in trouble, is sick, maybe is on the after effects of steroids or not, I don't know, but he is acting erratically and desperately, and we need to not normalize that. This is what we've come to expect for the last 3.5 years, 4 years, but it clearly is exacerbated by the time that we're in and the issues that he's dealing with. And I think that we cannot just let it be normalized. He is all over the place and acting erratically, and I think we need to lean into that.
The Trump media, moves immediately from, okay, well, never mind that unmasking was, found to be completely nonsensical, to the latest alleged scandal, and expects everybody to just follow suit. So I don't think that we should be repeating unsubstantiated smears just because the right-wing media suggests that we should. Frankly, if we've made any mistake, it's that our banners have been too polite, and we need to go well after Lindsey Graham. There's a ton going on. Let's stay strong. Let's stay newsy. Let's stay urgent. Let's be smart. There is a lot of news out there, and Lindsey Graham really deserves it. Each of these so-called scandals for Trump, each of these things, we should just once again be careful to say that this is the one that is going to undo him with his voters. And to respond to David Chalian's points about politics. I don't know why we would expect any of these politicians to have a conscience and or expect that politics wouldn't be completely hypocritical. And for us to expect anything else would be naive.
On the 9 a.m. conference calls every morning at CNN, their top leadership views their competition, Fox News and Tucker Carlson in particular, as racist and misinformed. Roll the tape.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're going to talk about the story, I think it's unavoidable that you have to talk about the naked racism of Tucker Carlson. Because that's really what drove this anti-diversity push. You know, Trump watches Tucker Carlson's show and then reacts. And just as sort of the white supremacy hour they have on Fox News every night, I think it's, you can't disconnect the two.
What Donald Trump did last night, for anybody who watches Fox News, he was just airing all of the grievances he hears on Fox News every night. And that's all he did.
The Hunter Biden story was an explosive blow against Joe Biden leading up to the presidential election. But listen on this 9 a.m. editorial conference call at CNN how President Jeff Zucker chooses to not cover this important story.
I think on the Breitbart, New York Post, Fox News rabbit hole of Hunter Biden, which I don't think anybody outside of that world understood last night, the Wall Street Journal reported that their review of all corporate records showed no role for Joe Biden on the Chinese deal. And yes, I do put more credibility in the Wall Street Journal than I do in the New York Post.
Obviously, we're not going with the New York Post story right now on Hunter Biden, and which seems to be giving its marching orders to Fox News and the right-wing echo chamber about what to talk about today. Obviously, Hunter Biden's lawyer is quoted in that New York Post piece, and we'll just continue to report out. This is the very stuff that the president was impeached over. This is the stuff that Senate committees looked at and found nothing wrong in Joe Biden's interactions with Ukrainians, and now having an email that perhaps there was a meeting with someone from Burisma is, it seems, Rudy Giuliani's sort of dream-a-vision of how to throw stuff at the wall in these closing days of the campaign.
Hey, Jeff, it's just David on the Burisma story, and we should be awfully careful about that, obviously. But I do think there's a media story of what in the world are Maggie Haberman and Jake Sherman doing, retweeting that story.
According to Senior Vice President of CNN, Cynthia Hudson, recorded on Jeff Zucker's 9 a.m. telephone call at CNN, the reason the Cubans voted for Trump is because they're attracted to bullies. Check this out.
Trump has used the communism, socialism rhetoric as part of his hook for the Cubans in Miami. How that has resonated and how the Biden team has not done enough to counter that. This is all that the only reason they are supporting Trump is because of that narrative. And that narrative and the fact that, sadly, I have to say, there's a population that is very attracted to bullies, and no one is countering it properly. In Florida, the Cubans are going to vote for Trump, and that's terrifying. And so I think that there is a way to counter the narrative in Florida that is not being taken advantage of.
Despite our own investigations into widespread voter fraud, CNN President Jeff Zucker still labels Trump as a bigger threat to our national security. Play the clip.
These Erie, Pennsylvania allegations of backdating ballots were retracted.
Trump continuing to undermine election integrity with baseless claims of fraud. Okay, and he's continuing to do it. And that leads to the question of whether or not Trump in himself is a national security threat in light of what he's doing and in light of what he did in the debate.
Hey, Jeff, it's David. I just wanted to make one point about contextualizing Ben Ginsburg. He's without a doubt the preeminent election lawyer on the Republican side and probably one of the most preeminent election lawyers in America. He's also had a front row seat to every Republican election initiative for the past 4 years. If he says voter fraud isn't a thing, that's kind of the end of the story. And we ought to treat that as a definitive answer. as we cover the story throughout. Our refrain ought to be, Ben Ginsberg was across us for 40 years and says it doesn't exist.
CNN is under the impression that the NFL can run the country better than our own government. Listen to him speak on Jeff Zucker's 9 a.m. conference call. This is signed by Mike Ditka.
As I was reading through the comments, Jim Acosta talking to people in the crowd at the rally last night, and obviously seeing all those pictures of no social distancing and very few people with masks on, etc., and the contrast to the football game last night, where lots of masks, people socially distanced, the whole plan in place to protect the fans, the players, the referees, the coaches, everybody. You know, Andy Reid wearing a face shield on the field. And the NFL, you know, it's an example of like if the NFL was running the government, then things would probably be in much better shape than they are.
Like other media enterprises, CNN doesn't think pedophilia allegations against the powerful elite are worth covering, and they explain this on their 9 a.m. Jeff Zucker call. Check this out.
The President of the United States has just retweeted a post accusing Joe Biden of being a pedophile to his 86 million followers, which is just beyond. You know, it also is just unacceptable that the President of the United States is trafficking in this and doing it.
The President of the United States is doing this. We talked about it yesterday with the pedophile thing. When the President puts this out on his Twitter feed to 70 million plus people, you know, it's viewed by millions of people, many of whom believe that it's real. It's insane that the President of the United States is doing this. And 2 days in a row now, one, Joe Biden's a pedophile, and two, Joe Biden is dancing and laughing to, you know, F the police. And it's just, you know, I mean, again, we have an issue because the more we show it or talk about it, we're actually giving it some air.
We always think that, but we need to make sure we have a sense of what's going on out in the country and not just listen to Twitter. With regard to the filth that they're spreading with regard to child pornography and all of that, I do not believe that we should be covering those allegations, even if they're out there on Newsmax.
This is the brave whistleblower insider who came to us with this information, Sean, and we encourage more people inside media enterprises to blow the whistle on the corruption inside big media.